Welcome to Planet Poet Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and my guest is the poet, writer, and training director for Amherst Writers and Artists, Maureen Buchanan Jones. Also joining us later today to bring us her unique insights into poetry and poets, as well as the latest in poetry news, is Planet Poet's poet at large, poet and visual artist, Pamela Monche Pierce. Hello, Maureen.
Hello, Sharon.
Welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you here.
It's really special to be here. I'm so glad that you asked me. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I'm going to read Maureen's bio. Maureen Buchanan Jones is the current training director and former executive director of Amherst Writers and Artists. Maureen has led workshops with diverse writers, including people who have experienced domestic violence, high school students, the bereaved, those who are in recovery, veterans, sexual assault survivors, and members of the LGBTQ community. She leads writing workshops and retreats online and in Massachusetts and California. Her poetry book, Blessed Are the Menial Chores, was published by Amherst Writers and Artists Press. Her novel, Maud Addie, was published by Regal Publishing House. And I just have to say, I had the pleasure of being trained in the Amherst Writers and Artists method by Maureen, and I'm very grateful for that. And Maureen, I'm going to ask you to start with a poem from your collection, Blessed Are the Menial Chores.
There will be nights. Her mother's words come from a fairy tale, a thread that binds, a spell that snares. They come softly or loudly, like a song the mother has to repeat, like a drawer she has to open and close, until it is more than an idea. It is the vapor the girl breathes, in and out, a skewed oxygen that mutates cells. A girl who breathes that kind of air, who walks wrapped in that kind of net, learns to breathe shallowly through her nose, learns to carry something that might cut. The shallow breathing means she cannot run, cannot bellow. The scissors or the razor means she will only hurt herself. Is this a magic she can break? She looks for signs, holds up mirrors, clips on a warning belt, turns the key in all the locks. Nothing. This is not make-believe. To undo her mother's words, the girl has to live it through. There will be nights of freezing rain, bills unpaid, bruises, dishes in the sink, police, vodka, strong hands, truck tires, a baby, $20 bills, the smell of grease, radiators hissing, and a chain link fence. And somewhere in the middle, or maybe toward the end, part of a map.
That's Maureen Buchanan Jones reading her poem, There Will Be Nights. Maureen, that's such a wonderful and scary poem on the road to independence. A mother's grip and the dangers on the path to freedom. Could you express more about what the speaker in the poem was talking about?
I love the way you talk about it, Sharon. That's lovely, the dangers on the road to the independence. I think, every child, it's not just for girls, but I think speaking as a woman, and especially a woman who, I'm a child of the 50s, and the mythologies, the ideas of what it means to be female, what it means to be part of the culture properly.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's individual, parent-child relationships. And I will say my mother, and I think she meant it half jokingly, but she would say, I pity the man who marries you. And and it repeated enough, it becomes more than just background noise. It becomes kind of a mantra. It becomes something that tells us about ourselves. So, children hear things, and even in fairy tales, we get cautionary tales about, if you don't behave, if you don't measure up, if you're not fitting into the mold and the framework, if you step outside that. So, what does one do to find themselves? They step outside, and sometimes there is danger in there.
Maureen, you've had so much experience training writers and being a writer. Could you talk a little bit about your own writing process?
Sure. I firmly believe that everybody's writing process is very individual, and even so, it differs from person to person, and even it differs within the person from moment to moment or time to time.
Mm.
And I know for myself, if I sit down at my desk, I think we all have this idea or had this idea of sitting down at a desk and waiting for the spark to fire,
Mhm.
the ignition to turn on. It may not happen. I find so often that if I'm out going for walks, or if I'm just going about my day, and part of my brain is sort of listening to conversations around me, and sort of looking or watching gestures, movements, little bits of meaning, even something as simple as coming out of the grocery store. And I saw a woman with a big pizza in a box, and she almost got to the car and it slid. And, I knew she was bringing this big pizza home for I don't know how many people. And there was just so much meaning in that moment for me. And, I haven't written about it. This is the first time I've actually even spoken about it.
Mm.
There it is. There's a possibility. There's a really rich possibility for either a poem or a character in a story. And so I think inspiration is always there inside of us. And that's the beginning of the process. And then the next part of it is just following that flicker and trying to be as true to it as possible. And sometimes it does mean going back and weighing, is this really what I wanted to say? Is this how I wanted to say it? Did I get to where I really feel like it matches up with what I was feeling?
Thank you, Maureen. That's really. I don't think I've heard anybody describe their process like so beautifully, actually, so concisely and meaningfully. Would you read another poem? It's called Beans Like Peace.
Beans like peace. This is one of those weeks when a bowl full of beans looks like salvation. The speckles on the lima beans keep company with the black-eyed peas. I have been hurried and rushed, small bits of me escaping. My gloves, the lid for the sauce pot. I show up for an appointment. I am told it is the wrong day. The beans sift into one another, make soft music as they jostle into friendship. The pinto beans curve like smiles, their skins not too tough for softening. I am on the expressway. A knobbed metal sphere drops from a truck 3 lanes away. It bounces, rolls. I have no options. A jolt, a bang. It flies off to the left. Rain comes down hard. I slow, inch right. The wheels stay on. I remember the bird I almost hit, swooping in early spring madness, diving. The beans look like peace. Great northerns, smooth and luminous next to hazy green whole peas. Everywhere an extra dot, a funny little line, a jot of color. The rain slaps and I remember this same day, a different day, my lifetime ago. I drove into the sun and knew he was gone. I knew all the diving birds, the lost pieces, the random flung obstacles, the botched appointments add up to nothing. I pay attention now to exactly how a yellow pea splits.
Wow, that's a beautiful poem.
Thank you.
That's Maureen reading Beans Like Peace. Speaking of blessed are the menial chores, and then you talk about the rain slapping. Could you talk about that turn a little bit?
I think ability to be present in a moment. The beans feel like that to me. The beans are an agent of grounding and bringing the narrator back to a place of being able to breathe. And the contrast, the rain slaps, and what comes after, the narrator remembering a day of irreversible loss and sort of a breathless, absolutely breathless moment. And so it's the finding peace in the beings, finding that settled ability to breathe. And then when was it needed most? And so sometimes we don't find what we need most until a long time afterwards. Or sometimes finding a moment of peace actually allows us to go back to a moment where we couldn't even grasp. It's impossible to grasp the enormity of it. And I think the our conscious and subconscious work in such wonderfully mysterious ways. In that way, we never know what touchstone is going to work for us. It's almost like a portal, like the Harry Potter portals or something, and it transports us.
Thank you, Maureen. I love the beans as an agent of grounding, and the way you describe that is lovely. One more poem, please.
Sure. Critique. This line is crap, he says, his body jigged up to a half twist, his fists making small jabs. He knows his stuff. I've heard it, heard his lines leading to the inevitability of that last line where the fog comes in. This line is crap, too. He screws his eyes toward the ceiling and uncorks his passion. Poetry is lines. Let the form squeeze your genius, he shouts like a fundamentalist preacher. Jesus Christ, I'm sick of the squishy shit they publish these days. His glasses swing from a beaded chain around his neck. He flashes at me and goes on. You can't say the enormity of being. What the hell is anyone supposed to do with that? And zoological correctness is so friggin' Germanic. Say zoolab. That sounds nice. His voice rises again, hits the bookshelf, and bounces around my ears. All you've got are your words once you're up there in front of people. Say it so they'll understand, for Christ's sake, not that fussy mannered sing-song. I won't go to any more readings. They make me sick. He swallows more wine, levels his eyes on me. The opening's blockbuster. Those lines are killer. If you can write a poem that matches up to those lines, then you'll have made something. Pick up those lines like a tow rope and let them take you. The last time I went water skiing, I almost had my arms ripped off, and I nearly swallowed the lake.
That's Maureen Buchanan Jones reading her poem Critique, which is truly hilarious. It's a great ars poetica. So this is, your poetry is so profound and beautifully crafted. And then you've written a novel for young people called Maud and Addie. Would you tell us a little bit about, introduce Maud and Addie for us, Maureen?
Sure. So Maud and Addie are two sisters. They are 11 and 12 years old, and this story takes place in 1910 in Nova Scotia, Canada. So these two girls have ideas about a day out, an outing, and they both have an agenda, and they have to row home. It's across the bay. They have to row home after the outing. And because they both have different ideas about what should happen, they end up being swept out to sea. These are sisters that bicker. I have 4 sisters and a brother, so I know about siblings and bickering. So they get swept out to sea, and that sets them on an adventure. So that's the lead up.
That's some lead up. I've read it. The relationship between the siblings is phenomenal, but I don't want to say anything more. Maureen, would you read an excerpt from Maud and Addie for us?
Sure. So I'm not giving too much away by reading this. So this is a chapter called "We're Not Back Where We Started." Addie said, "It's awfully quiet. Do you think we're far from anyone?" Maud halted and listened hard. They walked through the brittle branches of heath plants. Maud heard the ocean's thud grow louder. A few more paces would tell her what she suspected. "Addie," she said, "we might be quite far from anyone." Addie heard the dull pounding also and raced up onto a ridge and saw the sapphire ocean glinting. "Oh, this can't be an island." She looked left to right, searching for the land to continue, trying to make the continent appear. "But we landed after all that time in the boat. Wouldn't we have known it was an island right away? It feels large and solid." She dropped onto a rock and put her face in her hands. "We're nowhere, Maud. Do you understand? We are nowhere at all. Just here on this empty place without anyone. What are we supposed to do?" "It could be a good island," Maud said. "Big enough for lots of things." "Big enough to fool us," answered Addie. "If it's big enough," Maud continued, "maybe someone will look for us here." Addie tried to absorb what Maud was saying. "How far away do you think we are?"
That's Maureen Buchanan Jones reading an excerpt from her novel, Maud and Addie. I find the dialogue so real. And and it takes place in 1910, I believe. There's a little bit of that in the dialogue, but not really. It's sort of very timeless. Did your childhood summers, Maureen, inspire you to write this? I was reading that you spent your childhood summers in Nova Scotia.
Yes, and yes, absolutely. The landscape, and my mother was from Nova Scotia. I have dual citizenship as well, so Canada, my cousins. But also, so definitely the culture, the landscape, the ocean, the air, the salt in the air, all of it. But also the fact that I have all these siblings, and especially sisters, are very much a part of what these two girls are about. I've never been swept out to sea, so that is not something.
That's good. It seems like you might have been.
I've been in a small boat that wasn't doing very well, so I have been nervous in a boat before, but I think we've all had moments of being really scared or really feeling alone or out of our element. And so, but I think the setting definitely felt right, and then the conversations that these two girls have, they feel pretty much they feel pretty familiar to me.
And they're very different from each other, the sisters.
Yes,
they are and they aren't.
Yes,
and the bond between them. I won't give too much away. It's very, very touching. I also felt I was in a sea story. I smelled the salt. I knew I wasn't in Brooklyn anymore or in the Catskills. And Maureen, would you read another excerpt from Maud and Addie?
Sure, thank you. I'd be happy to. All right, so they are on the island, and this chapter is called "You're Full of Nonsense." "Just think, Maud," this is Addie speaking. "Just think, Maud, this very sand we're sitting on runs along the ocean's bottom and all the way back to Crescent Beach. If there wasn't all this water, we could walk home." Maud looked at Addie and laughed. She looked down the beach and out across all that water. "That makes it sound like we're not so very far from home." She jumped up with a sly smile. "We can't walk back, but we can practice swimming." At the water's edge, she stepped out of her bloomers, pulled off her chemise, and ran naked into the waves. "Maud," yelled Addie, "you can't do that." Addie was on her feet, rigid, as she watched her sister paddle and roll in the slow breakers. "It's wonderful. Try it," Maud called. Addie moved closer to the water, never taking her eyes from Maud. "Aren't you afraid of sharks?" "Sharks don't care if you have clothes on." Addie pulled off her chemise, dropped her pantaloons, and ran in. Someday, Maud, when we're proper ladies, we will remember swimming naked in the ocean like all the world's fishes. This won't be the last time, Addie. I plan to do this often.
It's wonderful. That is so great. The intensity of that freedom, only being castaway, could they do something like that
That's
in
right.
that time and
That's right.
place? I just love that. I love that passage. I also felt a little bit like I felt when I'm reading Alcott, uh, Eight Cousins, for example, or Little Women. Did you feel any kinship with Alcott when you were writing this, Maureen?
Yes, I think so. And I think also Lucy Maud Montgomery, the Anne of Green Gables.
Uh-huh.
And both of those writers are very lyrical in their prose.
Mm-hmm.
They're very descriptive, and their characters have very strong, especially, the female characters, they have decided points of view and they have decided personalities, and they bump up against what is expected of them as girls. And I think one of the reasons I enjoy hanging out with these two girls so much is because they constantly push not only the assumptions about what it means to be a young girl, no matter when. It's too bad that that it would be unusual to have two girls who figure out how to survive. But they're also the fact that they're sisters and they're not alike. And I think
That's
there's assumptions about sisters that they would be alike, and then even within families there are mythologies about, one sister is the smart sister and the other
mm-hmm.
sister
Mm-hmm.
is the, hands-on, or the one who will get her hands dirty. And the fact is we're more even, children are more complicated than that. And
Yes.
it's not fair to label kids. And so I like playing around with these two so that they push against themselves and each other with those ideas. And writing up the survival, figuring out how they were going to survive,
Yes.
great deal of fun, because that would be challenging for me. I'm not anywhere near as brave or as smart as either Maud or Addie.
Well, that's why I love the book, because my goodness, what they can do. But in times of need, they were both very resourceful, and Addie is more of the dreamer, but you do play with those roles. And Addie's older, so that's also being played with, because she's older than Maud, but Maud is more, I don't know if mature, but intrepid than she is in certain ways. And then it's very mixed up, which is wonderful. And and yours is very lyrical, beautiful imagery. So thank you very much, Maureen, for that. Maud and Addie. I can say that all day. Maud and Addie. You're listening to Planet Poet Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio. And we're live and local in the Catskills. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, here with my guest, poet, writer, and training director for Amherst Writers and Artists, Maureen Buchanan Jones. And joining us now from Manhattan is Planet Poets, Poet at Large, poet and visual artist, Pamela Moshe Pierce. As she has for over a decade, Pamela will contribute an original collage to the annual Visual AIDS Postcards from the Edge benefit for artists with HIV/AIDS. Hello, Pamela. Welcome.
Hello, Sharon. Hello, Maureen.
Hi.
What a treat it is for me to be here today. I can't tell you, Maureen was also my trainer in Chicago when I got my certificate, and it's probably about 10 years ago. I think it's around 2013. And a lot has happened as a result of that training, Maureen, which I plan to talk about later in my segment. It was absolutely wonderful. And thank you for sharing your beautiful work today. I enjoyed all of it. So thank you. As I was thinking about this segment today, I began to think about Pat Schneider. And I have her book. I'm very grateful that I got to meet her once. And she is the creator and the founder of the Amherst Writers and Artists Method of Writing Workshop Leadership. And I know the two of you, Sharon and Maureen, are going to talk a lot about the method and the nuts and bolts of the program later on. But I will just say that Pat Schneider's philosophy is that every person is a writer. And every writer deserves a safe environment in which to experiment, learn, and develop craft. When I was thinking of doing this training, and I began to read about Pat Schneider and her philosophy, I was so drawn to this, coming from a family of women not being good to other women, being perfectionistic, critical, and very, very competitive with one another. And here was a woman who had really begun her work, in my mind, by helping other women who did not have a voice, or voiceless, I think as they're referred to. And this was something very, very different. I felt it, and I felt the spiritual aspect of it too. I didn't know where that came from, but I felt it. And this atmosphere of warm acceptance and generosity of spirit really drew me in. So today I am paying tribute to Pat Schneider. In working on this today, I looked up the word icon. Icon, a person widely admired for having great influence or significance in a particular sphere. And in my mind, her influence lives on in the hundreds of leaders of these workshops and in the thousands of participants, and sometimes beyond that. We all carry her vision. A little bit about Pat. Pat was born in 1934 into poverty in the Ozark Mountains of Missouri to a single mother in a tenement, dire poverty, and she was later placed in an orphanage. Those early experiences fueled her desire to give voice, as we were talking about, to people who have all sorts of challenges in addition to poverty. Somehow, with grit and courage, she found her way to a good education and married a man named Peter, who was a Methodist pastor. And together, they decided to build a community-based social justice ministry. And that's the underpinning of this, as far as I'm concerned. And in 1981, she founded the AWA and worked with all sorts of women in the beginning, battling poverty and racism, in prison, et cetera, et cetera. And Maureen, you'll be happy to know that I have done hundreds of workshops since my training with you 10 years ago. I worked in libraries, public libraries in my area, where I worked with women who you would expect, mostly middle-aged women who had put their desire to write on hold, and then there they were. Many of them went on to get MFAs, to publish work, to create chapbooks, and to further their education. And it was very exciting to see them do that. But even more importantly, I think, in terms of when we're talking about Pat Schneider's vision, I went to work at a senior residence, and I went for 6 weeks, and I stayed for 6 years. I started with 2 people, and I wound up with 15 people.
Wow. And
this was a group, the average age was 90. And this is a group that I would describe, or Sly Stone describes it even better. These were everyday people. I had 2 retired janitors, a pharmacist. I had a woman who had been an extra on Lana Turner's movies in Hollywood. I had 2 bookkeepers, a housewife, and a woman who had a PhD in literature from Stanford. And she would read her work. If I can imitate, she'd say, "Today, I lifted up my coffee cup." So whatever she was reading from her prompt, she elevated it to absolutely to the max. But one of the people that really impressed me was a woman who was very clear when we did the prompts that her writing was autobiographical. Her name was Sally. And she was, when I left, she was about 98. And she made it to over 100 when last time I spoke with her. She couldn't have her 100th birthday because of COVID, the way that she wanted it. And then last time I spoke with her, she was approaching 101. And then I lost track of her. A couple of years later, I got a phone call, and the woman's voice on the other end her voice was cracking, and she said, "I am Sally Smith's daughter." And I said to her, "I don't want this phone call. I know why you're calling me, because Sally is gone." She said, "Yes, Sally is gone, but that's not the only reason I'm calling you." She said, "I'm calling you on behalf of our very, very large family to tell you that after Sally died, we found 6 years worth of her writing from the prompts in a drawer in her apartment."
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. And she said to me, we got our mother. We got a mother in a way that we could never, ever understand any other way. And we are grateful to you for doing what you did. And what popped into my mind was that one day we did a prompt, and it had to do with an envelope, either someone handing an envelope or under the drawer or something. And Sally wrote about her husband being in the Battle of the Bulge. And she had a young child, a boy, and she was very pregnant. And she didn't know whether he was dead or alive, whether he was going to come back. She hadn't heard from him in weeks and weeks and weeks. And she envisioned that this letter was from him saying that he was coming home. And she talked about how frightened she was in this situation where she was going to be a single mother. And that popped into my mind. And as this woman was talking with me on the phone, I realized that she was the baby that Sally was carrying. So it came full circle.
Yeah.
And I knew that all of these prompts that Sally had written they were putting them into a book. The family was a very large, very cohesive, positive, wonderful family. They were creating a book out of the prompts that Sally had responded to in these years. So when I heard that, and I was working on this today, this was Pat Schneider's vision, probably beyond what she could ever even think about as she began this program. So,
yes.
How beautiful,
and
Pamela.
Isn't
So
it?
Beautiful.
It's one of many. I mean, in my group, I had somebody in there who had been in the Normandy invasion as a 17-year-old sailor. I had somebody in there who had seen Hitler in person. You know, I had someone who had been extra with Lana Turner in Hollywood. So these everyday people all had these remarkable stories, and none of them were writers. They didn't think that they could write, and it just kept going. So I'm very grateful to you, Maureen. I'm very grateful to you, Sharon, to allow me to talk about this today, and it makes me feel wonderful.
And I'm very grateful to you, Pamela, because if it wasn't for you, I would never have taken the training. Because Pamela said, the training is wonderful. And I kept hearing about this and saying, I have to take the training. And it's a changer. It's a life changer. So thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Pamela. And Pamela Moshe Pierce, Poet at Large. What a beautiful, beautiful stories and inspiration. It was marvelous. Thank you. And Maureen, I want to hear about how you met Pat Schneider and how that affected your life.
I think everybody who met Pat can say things changed. Things changed after meeting Pat Schneider. So I met Pat the way most people met Pat, which is I knew about Amherst writers and artists for quite a while. I was busy teaching and just teaching and working, raising a family. But I always wanted to take a writing workshop. And I had taken MFA classes, but there was something about Amherst writers and artists living here in the town. So I was switching a job, and I had some time. So I called, and there was room in Pat's Thursday night workshop, which was just a mile across town.
Oh,
And so I walked into Pat's living room like so many people and sat down. And even though I had been teaching and I had done some writing, I think I'd even had maybe a poem or two published, my heart was still pounding. Um, because there was something very unique about this. Something very different was happening. You could feel it when you walked into the room.
mm,
There was the smell of brownies. There was, um, comfortable chairs in a circle. It wasn't a classroom. And then people began to write. And as Emily Dickinson says, the top of my head blew off. It's like, what are these people doing? They're really getting into it here. And so I thought, I'm not never going to measure up to this, but I'll give it a try. So I wrote, and just like so many, my voice was fluttering, my heart was going. I read, and then people did what they do in these workshops. They listen for what works, what's strong, what stayed with them, and they responded because we had just written together. We had
mhm.
no time to edit, no time to change anything. And they responded to what was strong in the piece. And so it builds confidence right from the beginning. And I began very slowly to believe that maybe I could say I was a writer. It took some time. And then within the first year, I learned that there was a training program. And I thought, okay, I'm looking for something different to do. So maybe that would work. So I took the training program, and I was one of the last groups that if I might have been the last group that Pat led. So
Wow.
then 6 months later, I started my own group. I had one group and I had just a little handful of people, and I was hooked. There was like, and even as hard as it is sometimes to start, this was starting my own business, I would get discouraged sometimes, and then I would think, well, wait a minute, that means I wouldn't have my workshop. Like, I can't imagine my life without a workshop. And
Ah,
I was still in Pat's workshops every Thursday night, so I had the privilege of watching how she handled situations
mhm.
and the people that came to write with her. You talked about, Pamela, the variety, the diversity of folks, both economic diversity, age diversity, cultural, religious experience, race, all of it, gender equality, or gender diversity. So it is a life lesson in how we are, each of us, very, very special, very unique in our voices. And then it's also an incredible life lesson in what we share as human beings. And I can honestly say I listen better. I am a
Mm,
much better listener for being in these
mhm.
workshops and leading workshops. My kids can testify to that, and I'm a gentler person. The sense of social justice, the compassion,
Mhm.
that question of, you don't know what's going on with anybody really.
That's right.
Okay. Um, so witnessing that every week, and then taking it on, trying to take it on as best I could in my own workshops and practicing that. Um, and it's one of those wonderful dynamic processes that it never stops. You always can go deeper, wider, because you don't know who's going to show up in your workshop and what they may have to show you.
So it stays fresh.
Yes, yes, it never gets old, because every time, even if it's the same people you're writing with, different things are going on for them.
Mhm.
They bring different things to the writing, and that's true for us as leaders as well. I mean, we're writing along with everyone
Yes.
else. So, I might be having a bad day. I can either set that aside, and then it's a relief. This The workshop
Yes.
is or I can dig deep. I can go hang out with Maud and Addie if I want to do. Or I can write about what's going on, or I can write about the world, what's going on, in whatever is happening. There's always something that's very hard that's going on in the world. And we can bring that and try to sort through what meaning it has for us.
Thank you, Maureen. And how could you describe your journey to the directorship of AWA?
Sure. So as I said, I was trained, and took the training. I think it was 2005, something like that.
Mm,
And right around that time, Pat Schneider was looking to step back from being the director. She and Peter, I really want to give a huge accolade and respect to Peter Schneider. Amherst Writers and Artists wouldn't have happened without Peter. His vision, his social justice vision, was always there and really strong, and his compassion. So I did the training, started my own workshops, and right around that time, they were looking to step back. And so a new director came in and another board came in, and well-meaning people, but it shouldn't be it wasn't sitting right exactly what they were doing. So there was some challenges that trying to smooth that all out. So that director and board stepped away, and so I was part of conversations trying to figure out what would work best, just trying to be supportive. And I do think that there was a meeting at Pat's house with a bunch of us, and I was the only one that didn't take a step backward when somebody said we need a director. And so there I was standing in the middle. Because I had no training, and I had done some administration, and I had certainly done graduate applications for programs and things like that. But I hadn't run a nonprofit. But the organization was a bit wobbly at that point. So I stepped in and started working at what I did know was curriculum development, and I knew how to teach, and I've always loved teaching. So I put my focus into that, and the AWA trainings are the foundation of the organization. So for 9 years, that's what I did. And
9 years.
Yeah, and kind of, with other really good people on the board and other instructors that were leading the trainings with me. We're all learning.
Did you develop the new board and hire the find the instructors, or is it an organic thing?
I found the instructors, and some of them were sort of around and there already, and then new instructors. The board that formed, they kind of chose themselves, and then they took on finding new members. That was not the nonprofit structure of the board is kind of the boss, and I was the employee to the board of directors. We had conversations. We had lots of conversations about everything that needed to be done, all the programs that needed to be attended to.
So you stabilized the organization enough for you to sort of step down after 9 years.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, after about 9 years, there was, as I said, I was never trained to be a nonprofit director, and it takes real skill. I mean, fundraising is one of the big things, and it's huge. So, other people with other skills and vision, it was absolutely right for them to take over, or to take the organization to start making those decisions. And it made perfect sense for me to then focus on what actually is one of my passions.
Lucky for Pamela and me that you were teaching at the time.
Yeah. What I've always believed, I think one of the scary things for me becoming the director was people would say, well, now I'm the new face of AWA. I'm the new Pat Schneider. And my response to that was, oh, absolutely not. So my take on my role, it was as a steward of the AWA method, that it was my job to uphold the integrity of it. And that was really just a continuation of how I lead the workshops, how I teach everybody else to lead their workshops, that this is the core of it. And so I think that it served me well. I also think it served the organization well, so that it wasn't, and I use the phrase cult of personality, not as a, dismissal of Pat in any way, but just as a way to kind of think about it, that the organization wasn't based on one person, because it needed to know whether it would survive once Pat stepped away. And
yes.
And that is a testament. Go ahead, Sharon. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but it's hard to immediately follow a visionary founder.
Yes.
So it's great that you came in after the first round of people that were in there, because it's very, very hard to come in immediately, and you sort of absorbed what was going on. You were the perfect person, but you found out only through this process.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if I'm making any sense.
Yes, you are. You absolutely are, because there's always going to be friction. There's always going to be some knots to untangle.
Mm-hmm,
And that's not an easy process, especially, somebody, with great, I mean, it takes someone with an enormous amount of passion to found a nonprofit, to start an organization like this, and to keep it going and to develop it. I mean, the organization, I think at this point, it's international. We have
mm-hmm.
had, there are people in Australia, there are people in Japan. I mean, there's people all over the place who are leading these. So I think we're up over, we have, I think we can say, thousands of workshop leaders. And, but there's also the publishing part of Amherst Writers and Artists that
Mm-hmm.
puts out a beautiful poetry journal every year,
Mm.
a vetted, edited poetry journal that is open to the public. And if you go back to the original versions of those volumes of those journals, there are some pretty impressive names in there. People who are getting started as poets.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Maureen, could you explain or say what the AWA affirmations are for our listeners?
The affirmations are the belief system, sort of the philosophy that underpin the workshop method itself, sort of the guidelines of how we behave in the workshop, the norms that we follow. But the affirmations are necessary for the workshop leaders to believe too.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them, it starts off with everybody has creative genius within them. And that's that wildness that's inside of us, that free association, that creativity,
Mm-hmm.
that if we can relax and let ourselves play, we can get to that. So it means we each are unique in the way that we create art. Everybody has the right, no matter their education, their economic status, everybody has a right to access art with a capital A, and
Mm-hmm.
writing as an art form. The other affirmation is the belief that we are all equal as artists. So even though I lead a workshop, I am not the teacher, and my
Mm-hmm.
writing is not, quote, better than anybody else's. And I may know some things about writing, but maybe other people do in the workshop as well. And so we learn by listening to each other and following our craft as we want to.
Mm-hmm.
And with all of that put in place, and we also believe that we can teach craft, or we can develop our craft without, and this isn't the official language, but this is just what's coming,
Mm-hmm.
without squishing anybody or shredding anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think the official language, without doing harm to the creative
Yes.
spirit. That sounds more grown up. And so we can talk about craft, and we can, when we do a manuscript review, a balanced look at someone's writing, we can do it in a way that is helpful, that somebody actually can take it in and doesn't feel defeated after having
Yes.
work looked at. And so with all of that in place, it comes down to a writer is someone who writes.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all writers. We all have stories to tell. We all have poems and songs inside of us that show up at any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
And given the opportunity and the respect, we can share those and begin to have confidence in them.
Thank you, Maureen. And would you briefly talk about the 5 essential practices? And we talk about the leader writing along with everybody else, I think, is one of them.
It is. It's the very first one. There's no hierarchy. There's no structure in the sense of, a teacher is above the class. That the teacher knows everything and is superior somehow. Our job as workshop leaders is to uphold the method and pay attention to time and bring in prompts. So everybody is equal as a writer. When we write whatever it is we want and need to. We don't even have to follow the prompt if we don't want to. And then when we read, we honor confidentiality. very strictly in the workshop, which means that anything that gets written doesn't get taken away outside of the workshop and shared. But in addition to that, there's another form of confidentiality where we respect everybody's privacy. And the way that we do that and keep our focus strictly on the writing is by treating all the writing as art, as created literature. We can say it's fiction, or we can say that it is still true. I read novels, and there's a lot of truth in novels, but we don't ever assume that anything written is about the writer. So we use words like narrator, character, speaker, or protagonist. And it keeps a separation between the writer and the listener. So as listeners, it's not our job to fix the writing, and it's not our job to fix the writer.
That's a concept unfamiliar or foreign to certain people. It's hard.
It is. The older models, didn't have any of that. Some models are using parts of this. When we respond, we also, because usually it's just written work, so we don't offer suggestions. We don't direct a writer to do whatever what we think it should happen to it. We don't correct anything in this moment because the writer hasn't had a chance to edit. And so we notice we notice the craft in the piece. We notice what is working, what effect. We can notice what effect the writing has had, and then how it achieved that effect. One of Pat's rules of thumb: if you share your writing with anybody, afterwards ask yourself, do you feel more like writing or less like writing? If you feel less like writing, don't share your work with that person again. They may be very, very capable, very smart, lots of books published, or lots of letters after their name, but they aren't able to talk with you in a way that is supportive of your writing. I mean, I just read a poem. That line is crap. I mean, it made me laugh, but it's kind of a blow, and we have to recover from that in order to take in what might be being offered.
Maureen, would you talk about writing at full tilt, which is your workshop presentation, and so much more?
Yes. So I have my own business called Writing Full Tilt, and right now I lead 4 workshops online. And I've been leading workshops, as I said, for I think since 2006. And then I have 2 retreats that I lead every year. One is in Western Massachusetts. That's an in-person retreat. And then I have one coming up in February in Malibu. And that's in
Oh my
person.
good. Whoa.
Yeah, and it's 5-day, they're both 5-day retreats. One of the things I love about leading in workshops is finding prompts. It's second only to it's a creative outlet, second only to my own writing. One of the things I love about leading the workshops, so there's the prompts that I like to bring in, but honestly, the privilege of listening to what people create in the moment. It is so fulfilling. I never know where I'm going to go, where the writing's going to take me. And on any given day, I am introduced to people I would never have met before, either fictional or, from memory or imagination, or I'm taken places I will never go, or I travel in time and space. Some people write science fiction. Or there's poetry, different kinds of poetry or poetic writing that happens that is just incredibly inspiring. And then, as we talked about, then there's the dynamics of the group, whoever is in the group, who shows up, and how they form a group and believe in each other and support each other. And it is really heartwarming. It is so affirming and fills me with hope. I say this all the time to my workshop members. Nothing dismantles us. I mean, the world dismantles us over and over and over again, every day, in big ways and small ways. It just does. And I believe in therapy. I've had great therapists, and yet nothing puts me back together again quite the same way that being in a workshop does. I am whole. I am whole again afterwards.
Thank you, Maureen. would you tell me if our listeners are interested in taking an AWA workshop or training as an AWA leader, where they may go?
Sure. The best place to go is to the Amherst Writers and Artists website. So
Okay.
it's amherstwriters.org, www.amherstwriters.org, and go to, read the method, read the information that's there, and then click on the training program, and it will
Great.
give you the schedule and the fees and more information. And if you have questions, absolutely send an email. It will have that information in there, a place where you can click and send questions about the program.
Thank you, Maureen. Would you sign us off with a poem, another poem?
Sure. Yes. I was thinking, would you like a poem by Pat Schneider or me?
It's your choice.
All right. Since I picked up my book first, I'll be a little bit selfish.
Yay.
All right. This is the first one in the book, in Blessed Are the Menial Chores. Undergrowth. Sometimes you write things you don't want to. You want your pen to move in a different direction, but you don't have the energy or the focus or the strength of character to keep it in its track. So you let it loose. Say, don't go far, in a half-hearted voice, and watch the pen run off into the undergrowth and start scratching. You know something is going to get dug up. Something you'll want to get off your hands later. Something that has hot red eyes. But it's too late. Ink is getting spilled.
Ink is getting spilled.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Maureen. Maureen, if people want to know more information about Blessed Are the Menial Chores and Maud and Addie, where would they go to find find out about the books?
You can go to writingfulltilt.com website.
Okay.
I also have Maureen Buchanan Jones website, but go to Writing Full Tilt. That's the one that's website that's most developed. I have a newsletter that is a blog, so that's on the website, so you can read through any past newsletters that look interesting to you as well. So
thank you, Maureen Buchanan Jones. I can't thank you enough for being on the show. It has been absolutely wonderful.
I am so grateful, Sharon.
It is fabulous.
Have this conversation with both of you means the world.
Thank you. And Pamela's beautiful segment on Pat Schneider. What a show. I'm very happy. Thanks so much. And thank you all for listening.